Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Digital Twin Roundtable talk looking at the interconnected digital twin. I'm Tom Hughes, the delivery lead of the Digital Twin Hub. I'm welcomed today by 5 of the 7 members that have participated in the Twin Talk series. Just a note for participants, this roundtable is going to be recorded, so I hope you're happy with that. We'll be sharing it on the Digital Twin Hub for the benefit of the community. During the Twin Talk series, you can pose questions either by posting them in the chat or by raising your hand. I'll then invite people to ask a question once they've raised their hand. But for the benefit of others, if you can keep yourself on mute at all other times, that'd be appreciated. I'll also share in the chat the objectives for the Twin Talk series. Hopefully this will help stimulate some of the discussion. But first of all, I'd like to welcome our guests and hand over to them to introduce themselves.
Hi there, everyone. My name's Tom Henderson. I run the Digital Twins program at Tech UK. So Tech UK is the UK's Technology Trade Association. The group formed at the start of this year, and it's made up of a number of different experts from different sectors and disciplinary backgrounds. And we're working with the CDPP to provide critical advice on the evolution of their policy frameworks or investment ideas and proposals. And always open to discuss with any of you, so feel free to get in touch after this if you want to learn more about the group.
Thanks very much, Tom. Thanks for joining us.
I am David Mckee. I'm the CEO and CTO at Slingshot Simulations, where we're building digital twin platforms. I also co-chair the technology working group at the Digital Twin Consortium.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, I can go. Hi there. I'm Neil Bammel. I'm a technical advisor to the Geospatial Commission in the Cabinet Office. And currently, I'm a product owner for the National Underground Asset Register project, which is proving the concept of having a combined view of underground assets and moving towards appointing a supplier for the national system.
Thanks very much, Neil.
Hello, I'm Miranda Sharp. I work with the Centre for Digital Britain on the common stream of the National Digital Twin Programme. We're looking to create the best possible information management framework, which will enable people to connect digital twins and also ease its path towards adoption.
Mark Birkin, I'm Professor of Spatial Analysis and Policy in the School of Geography at the University of Leeds, and I'm also Programme Director for Urban Analytics at the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, where one of my jobs is leading a programme on the digital twin for urban analytics, digital twin of the UK cities.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's great to have brought together such a brilliant panel today. I think to begin the discussions, I'd like to pose the first question on both the why and the how of interconnected digital twins. I think, Miranda, given your viewpoint from the National Digital Twin Programme and your talk on why a National Digital Twin, I'd like to throw over to you first, but then equally would like comments from all of the members of the panel today.
So why a National Digital Twin? That one I'm answering.
Why a National Digital Twin and also how?
Yeah. So at the moment we see a number of digital twins emerging to serve particular purposes, and those are within organisations. And that creates, that has problems of its own. So as people try to put together a business case to do it and tackle the technical problems of putting their data together to make better decisions. And when we talk to people who are creating their own digital twins, they tend to be doing so for very good reasons around workforce productivity, or better collaboration, or efficiency, or safety, or better asset management. And those are laudable reasons for creating an isolated digital twin. And we need to make sure that people have good reasons and have benefits of creating those isolated digital twins. But we believe on the National Digital Twin Programme that there are reasons for connecting digital twins. So, for example, we believe that the best way to tackle things like pandemic response, so items which have a resilience impact, or tackle the climate emergency, we need to go to connect these digital twins so that we can see, for example, and make those difficult trade-offs, ask those really difficult what-if questions. How much power do we need to use to move water, and how much water do we need to move to create power? And where's the optimal balance on that? And only by connecting those digital twins are we going to be able to answer those questions and reach those benefits. And so I think so we can talk about those benefits of connected digital twins, and we see the ultimate goal as a connected series of twins, or a network of twins, or an ecosystem of twins that will form a national digital twin. I think there is danger in leaping straight to a Borgesian representation of the map of everything. I think we need to be really sensible about which twins we connect in order to achieve benefits, but also in the meantime create as much data which is interoperable as we can in order that we achieve as much benefit as we can in the future. And there's a difficult balance there between making things interoperable and linking them together, and spending too much doing that and not receiving benefit back for those businesses that are enterprises that are going to have to invest in connectable data. So I hope that's answered the question.
Thank you, Miranda. I wonder if any of the other panel would like to jump in on that and build on Miranda's answer.
I'm happy to go next, if you like.
Thanks, Mark.
I mean, I think primarily to endorse a lot of that, but one of my feelings is, I mean, Miranda talked about the what if type questions, which is something kind of quite close to my own heart, and really to make the point that some of those questions are really quite challenging. I think I made the point in my talk. UK geospatial strategy talks about putting the UK at the forefront on a global scale in terms of our capability to do things with digital data, and so I don't think we should shy away from those hard questions. But you need advanced capabilities. I think we need modelling and simulation capabilities. On occasion, relevant applications for artificial intelligence, that kind of thing. So, and one of the reasons, therefore, for thinking about this national digital twin and interconnected agenda, I think, is precisely to allow us to focus on some of those difficult questions and really extracting the value from a lot of the work that's going to go into creating these interoperable and connected systems, the actual mechanics of the thing. And then just to add to that, I think in terms of connectivity, again, one of the things that really interests me are those public policy, planning type applications. So the COVID thing is interesting, not just in its own right, but for me because it points up the kinds of things that we might be doing and where we're potentially deficient in terms of how we approach infrastructure planning, transport, land use, housing, all these questions. And of course, they are heavily interconnected. You can't think about how to plan the future housing needs of this country without understanding transport and economic development and activity, and issues relating to sustainability and all the rest of it. So I think connecting these things together is hugely important.
Thanks, Mark. That's excellent. I wonder, David or Neil, whether you've got any tactile examples of connecting digital twins for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so I think the simple answer first to your question is it's all about having a fuller picture of causal relationships and actually understanding the why, the what ifs, optimizations and scenarios. So an example is the work we've been doing in Leeds City Centre, where we've been tying analysis from footfall sensors with ANPR cameras and traffic data, as well as satellite data for air quality, all around COVID, looking at, and I'll play a really simple example to you all. So We've got widening of pavements that's happening to accommodate social distancing. That means we are shrinking the size of the roads down to one lane, and that actually then corresponds to an increase in traffic because there's less space for the cars. That results in more congestion, resulting in more air pollution, which then cycles back. More air pollution means more lung disease, meaning more prone to infections such as COVID. So there's a whole link of different things that would sit typically in different silos of research and being pulled together, and we're working closely with the University of Leeds and Mott MacDonald and Leeds City Council and several others on that. And that's an example. There's many others, but hopefully that is an interesting one to start with. And I think the key point in the how, just to answer that very quickly, is most of it, the challenges for us is around semantic integration. So the semantics of how you link things together. If we start using the same terms, whether it's down to the same units, metric versus imperial, or to actually describing things like torque in the same way, those types of things that get really detailed, that gets us a long way to be able to do a national digital twin. We can then deal with the technical challenges of protocols, APIs, all of that. But that actually, the technology is there, but the semantics is probably the biggest piece.
Thanks, David. I think that's perhaps a really good segue over to Neil. I know that in Neil's presentation there was a lot of discussion around standardising terms within the National Underground Asset Register.
Yes, it does. It does time very closely to what we're doing, and I guess my viewpoint here is very much from the kind of bottom up, right? Rather than the top down, and thinking of NUAR as potentially one of these building blocks in a more interconnected world. I think Miranda made a really good point, which is very very much at the forefront of my mind, is that these individual systems, these individual representations do have to stand alone as well in terms of providing value themselves, just as the practicalities of getting projects off the ground, really. So the kind of isolated business case, if you like, has to stack up, and that's what we've been trying to address with NUAR in terms of really focusing on high value use cases, while trying not while being aware that there may be future requirements for extensibility and interoperability, which we can't identify yet, but which we are aware we may have to deal with in the future. So for us, it's been around building on principles of extensibility and interoperability, and specifically through a standard data model, which will become an open data model, and trying to represent things in that generic way that makes that semantic interoperability a bit easier in the future, without knowing the precise details of what that interoperability will have to be. So for us, it's been all about building on those good principles.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Neil. Before I pass over to Tom for his answer to the question, just a reminder to the audience, if they'd like to ask a question to the panel, they can either post it in the chat or let us know by raising their hand they'd like to ask a question in person. So Tom, over to you. In terms of the why and the how of the interconnected digital twin, how are you seeing that within the membership of Tech UK?
Yeah, so I think just really to echo what's already been said on the first question, perhaps. So, the complex interconnected nature of policy problems and business problems that we're faced by, requires that holistic joined-up approach, and it's no different within the digital twin ecosystem, and also, in the context of the current crisis and the need to kind of accelerate and de-risk innovation across multiple layers of the economy. Digital twins can play a key part in that, and it's only going to really have the maximum kind of multiplier effect if it's, again, done in a joined-up way. I would also just add that, I guess, it's becoming almost a business imperative to begin integrating digital twins and kind of affiliated processes into your business models. If we think about kind of incoming regulation regarding kind of environmental protection, and in particular the example of kind of TCFD, so the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Over the next kind of months and years, businesses are going to have to find ways of demonstrating that their business processes and business plans are actively contributing to climate resilience building activities. So I think digital twins can, in a way, kind of capture and accelerate that process and enable them to communicate to key decision makers how they're actively and proactively helping to address those challenges. And then I guess a couple of points on the how. So I think the only thing that I would say around this idea of kind of building up an upper ontology and foundational data model that's come out of recent discussions is that it can sometimes be quite a long process to do that. And so in the interim, is there a need perhaps for a consistent way of sharing kind of metadata, signaling who owns it, the shelf life of that data, how to access it, and that sort of mechanism could provide a basis for kind of future innovation in the absence of an upper ontology. The second point I'd add around the how is just to be perhaps cognizant of the different levels of uncertainty and risk associated with different technical arrays. So there's perhaps an assumption that all twins are going to meet their purpose necessarily, and that you can kind of integrate them seamlessly. So perhaps we need to think about how we signal that level of uncertainty attached to a particular digital twin. And then finally, it's already been mentioned around the kind of semantic side, but just to reiterate, I guess, there's that need to recognise the softer side of integration. So those non-technical incentive structures and processes which drive integration and interconnectedness of the ecosystem as a whole. So I guess three factors there on the how.
Thanks, Tom. I've just had a question from Mark Enzo in the chat. Mark, I don't know if you'd like to come on live and ask the question to the panel, or I'm happy to read it out.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I've sat here listening to the panel and been really impressed in the coherence of what they're all saying. Different people come from different perspectives, but it feels like it's the same narrative, which is fantastic. It does feel very coherent and, to me, very compelling. But what I wonder then is how do we communicate this to those who are not yet on board? Because I think that at the moment, there's a relatively small number of us who are speaking to each other inside an echo chamber and all agreeing with each other. How do we actually communicate it to the others out there to get the critical mass to make this into what effectively would be a national movement that means that it really happens? So I'd be really interested to know, what that simple, coherent, compelling message would be that will convince the as yet unbelievers.
Anyone brave enough to tackle that first?
If I could jump in very quickly, because I had this conversation with actually Leeds City Council this morning, and it's actually the question is the answer. Unfortunately, it's how can we demonstrate the ROI, particularly given the current COVID crisis where budgets have been cut significantly. How can we show and have a few case studies where we can put a metric on there and say, is it a 3-to-1 ratio in terms of return on investment or 5-to-1? That is in essence the equation that people are looking for. And that would definitely make that conversation much easier.
And I fear it's not as simple as one question, because in a world where we don't yet have a way of valuing information, it is more complicated. I was thinking this morning about when I was booking a train to go to Manchester next week, about how the rail operating companies withdrew from ticketing and timetabling. They gave that job to another part of an ecosystem, and now they are unsighted as to the demand on their service, the unmet demand on their service. And while in the time they made that decision, they didn't value that data. And now, if they had that data as an input, they might very well be better able to make the case for the digital transformation. So I agree with you. It's you know, what's the ROI, because we have to talk in the language of business. But equally, I think it's challenging. You know, when you look at NUR, for example, it sort of goes to a higher order case. You know, it's about workplace safety, and therefore you know, you can make it that's unarguable, and it enables you to come outside the ROI sort of constraints as they exist at present. I'll go there. Perhaps we can go to Neil and ask him what he thinks about how he's made the case.
Yeah, thanks, Miranda. Yeah, I think you make a really good point, and I think we may consider that as the part of the NUR case is what we might consider the social ROI. Because in our particular case, we can say there's very good strong research that says that for each pound for each pound of cost that arises from direct damage to underground assets, there is a £29 cost to wider society in terms of disruption and interruption to critical services and things like that. So we're absolutely underpinned by the that kind of academic research that has expressed that that social impact, especially at University of Birmingham. So yeah, we do, coming back to the original point, though, you do need to make the individual intervention stack up on its own, and then the benefits of interoperability and need to be expressed as a separate case, really, and an add-on to that, but it has to stack up on its own. But absolutely, social ROI. I don't know if that's a phrase, but that's what that's very much at the heart of what we're doing.
I don't know, Tom or Mark, whether you'd got any kind of follow-up to the original question.
Well, my immediate, instinctive reaction, I guess, was, essentially that some form of demonstrable national level support or coordination would be kind of nice. I mean, I guess one of the things where I came into this was around the National Infrastructure Commission, Data for Good report, which everybody will have seen, I'm sure, and been impressed by. And thinking about my own sort of local perspective, one of the things that said was, it would be great for the Turing Institute to be working with the Centre for Digital Built Britain and others to create narratives and demonstrators and infrastructure, I guess, for the promotion and delivery of digital twins, which is fantastic, but we've kind of been left to get on with it, on our own devices to deliver that agenda. And I think, as Mark says, it's impressive that everybody's on the same page in circumstances, but clearly there's a danger that we all end up, slightly reinventing these narratives and agendas. So, I don't know whether we just need a version of the Geospatial Commission, or we need to just come together as as some kind of more formal alliance of the interested parties to take this thing together, to take this thing forward together. But it needs that more focused initiative and impetus, I think.
Tom, what about your views? Is there a simple and compelling message yet within your membership?
So not a simple message, unfortunately, but I would agree with what Mark has just said there completely. I think the role of the government, from our perspective, that we see is, I think can play a really key part as an enabler and a convener. So I think the reason why we set up the group in the first instance was we recognised that the ecosystem was slightly fragmented, nascent to start with, but it needs some sort of central convening body that enables those interactions between the different stakeholders in the ecosystem. And then as a particular enabler of activity, I think there's, as Miranda said, I think there's much more work to be done around providing firm support for companies and initiatives that assign a monetary value to data infrastructure, that build up those comprehensive data asset portfolios and develop holistic strategies that actually track data asset growth and ROI. So having those kind of companies underpinning the activities of digital twin developers enables them to prove that there is kind of strategic long-term value in the initiatives that they're developing. And then another point that I would say as well, just to add, so I think developing that business case is really key, but I think the core part of that is around starting the journey. So, you know, what are the technical components that a company would need to adopt in order to develop or bring a digital twin into the context of their business. But then equally, you know, where will they be 3 to 4 years down the line? And what will my digital twin look like later on when it becomes, when it starts to integrate with other digital twins, and how will that process actually come to fruition? I think at the moment there's a lot of kind of linear case study sharing, but perhaps a lack of, you know, tangible collaboration on kind of actual data models, hardware business models. So I think those kind of computational leadership networks need to just become a little bit stronger in terms of you know, how they're actually collaborating on different things. I think one of the things that we've been looking at as well is the development of some form of industry-backed or you know, cross-sector backed reference architecture. So again, that links really well, I suppose, with all the work on the IMF. But I think that absence of that kind of common terminology for how you refer to different components of digital twin is a bit of an inhibitor. And equally, the lack of a kind of industry-backed or cross-sector backed.
I think we've just lost your audio, Tom. If we can get you back really quickly. It's better, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I was just saying, I think the lack of a taxonomy as well, so a clear kind of categorization of different tranches of digital twin development is again a bit of an inhibitor for decision makers who perhaps aren't as embedded within the ecosystem. So I think you need a kind of clear generalist perspective on the different tranches of development, and that enables decision makers within government and across different industries to understand how a digital twin might interrelate with their particular problem domain. And then the final point, as Mark alluded to there as well, around and Neil as well, around the need for new value frameworks and a demonstrated project which kind of drives horizontal progress around that value framework. One of the things that we're looking at is whether there is scope for some form of digital twin demonstrated project that we could fit in line with particular kind of climate resilient building goals, and then pitch that demonstrated project at COP26 or some form of kind of global climate conference, just to really showcase the UK's capabilities, but also drive collaboration from a data centre perspective on a particular digital twin challenge.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mark, for the excellent question. Stimulated a really good discussion. I think there's, you know, opportunity for us all to think about that consistent, kind of concise message to drive the interconnected digital twin forward. I've had a really excellent question from Catherine Simpson on legal implications. I don't know, Catherine, if you'd want to join us live to ask the question to the panel, or if not, I'm happy to ask it on your behalf. I'll jump in and ask the question. So Catherine's posed the question on legal implications of digital twins, and add an example, for example, in construction contracts. So yeah, welcome people's views on potential legal implications and yeah, how we might address those.
I can go first there. From the NUAR point of view, I would say that the the technical problems have almost been the least of our challenges, I guess. the big challenges have been around the building of trust, the building of a community that really enables the bringing together of data and to some degree different cultures and different viewpoints within different organisations. And of course that is underpinned by a legal, there is a legal underpinning to that, as well as broader questions of trust and collaboration. So we've, I'm not certain, there's still work to do there as well. But the big, points that we've come across in terms of the legal underpinning is being very clear about the terms of reference, the purpose of sharing the data, and really being very clear up front about what acceptable usage is, being sympathetic to concerns around sensitivity, and being able to deal with that in an appropriate way, up to and including a redaction of data and things like that, and having a proportionate approach to that. And then I would say the question that always comes up is all about liability, as well. So the different roles within that chain of data sharing. I'm absolutely not a legal expert, so I will kind of leave it at that. But those are the main challenges we've been grappling with success at this stage, at the pilot stage, but there's more to come on that.
Thank you, Neil. I wonder if anyone else has got any thoughts on the legal implications of interconnected digital twins.
So I would agree. It's enormously complex, and yes, it's interesting to hear Neil say that we may regard the technology as the easy bit ultimately, and it's not just legal; it's regulatory. So often people, we talk to people who will say, I simplify it for the sake of this one, but I talk to a council who will say, I know that I need to invest in primary school education because that reduces my prison population. But the problem is I've got the bill for primary school education and I don't pick up the bill for prisons. And therefore, how do I make that case? How do I make my cost and your benefit linked together in some way? And that is magnified many times when people are talking about data assets, and as soon as sort of we get into a contractual and legal place. And particularly when data is such a slippery asset. So if I give you my data and it's fairly shoddy, and you do really good work with it, for which you devise great value, what call do I then have? And the problem is that the technology and the usage is evolving much faster than the commercial models to capture that kind of thing. Which is why, and I thought it was brilliant the way Neil referenced it, you've got to be very clear about your purpose and the function and establish the trust within the digital twin. And those are the principles, those are the three main sort of tenets of the Gemini principles. And that's why we started where we did with the National Digital Twin Programme. Because we know this is going to be complicated and messy, but we are confident that if you start there with a clear purpose and adequate function and trust, that you will get good outcomes. So I'm interested to ask Mark as well, because a lot of the work that he does, which even goes into the world of personal data, is more complicated still, and see what lessons he's learned.
I'm very happy to pick up on that on that thread, and I think that at a high level, I suppose my response would be that I think we need to push the envelope further in terms of shared access to data. Clearly a number of the examples that Miranda and Neil have talked about, we can get into situations where organisations have legitimate ownership over kind of intelligence relating and data relating to the assets that they hold, and if somebody else wants to extract value from that, then there's a contractual commercial issues which are difficult to address. The things that I struggle with are, clearly we can see examples in COVID, where local hospitals can't get access to data about what's happening in a local area because the national institutions won't release it to them, and clearly there's a lot of legal complexity around that. Similarly with a lot of personal data that let's say retail organisations own, it kind of belongs to you and me, but it's all got lost in some kind of exploitation type model. And if we're thinking about public benefit type applications around infrastructure development, making big investment decisions with a lot of sort of national impact and public benefit, I just don't think we have those underpinning models. They're just not right. And as Miranda says, I mean, I've been trying to do some specific work in that area, for example, around the Consumer Data Research Centre that and a national research centre that UKRI funds in Leeds, trying to encourage organisations to find ways to share that data for academic and other kinds of benefit applications. But there's a lot more we can do. And again, I think we must get better at doing that if we're going to be well, you would like to be world leading, but even if you're going to be effective in responding to things like COVID, again, a great example. I could say more about what we do there.
Thank you, Mark. I wonder, David or Tom, is there anything related to the implications of legal implications of data sharing that you've come across as part of your work?
It's a very interesting, grey, fuzzy, use whatever other word you want to use to describe it. We've been having extensive discussions with the Open Data Institute actually around this, looking at the concept of data institutions and understanding that, as well as with the Lloyd's Register Foundation and the University of York with their Centre for Autonomy, where it's starting to bring this piece of, it is all about liability, as already mentioned, and it is also about data quality, of understanding, well, actually, you put the data in, and if it's junk, what comes out, you can't trust it anyway. So how do you actually prove that the data that's gone in is good enough? And that has been probably the biggest challenge we've hit, in that there's missing data or data in different formats, it's a semantic issue as well, and actually you then can't trust further down the value chain. There's actually a great example if you look at the automotive supply chain, and there's a lot of work going on in that at the moment, standards being proposed with CCAV and others, to understand how do we standardize and understand the models of different parts of the vehicle as we go through that, and then design decisions that are made, where does the liability fall across that. So when something fails, this could be something like Dieselgate, but it could be something as simple as a valve failing. Who is liable all the way through that? And that becomes more and more important, particularly as we move to level 4 autonomy in terms of vehicles and so forth, which digital twins will play a big part of it. So that's where we're seeing some really interesting questions. But it's incredibly complicated, and it's not just personal data, it's commercial data, and so forth. But unfortunately, I don't really have an answer yet, but it's a big open research question that I really advise people look at some of the work coming out of the University of York. They're doing a lot of interesting work on this.
And Tom, how about your views from a Tech UK perspective? Is the legal implications of digital twins something that's being discussed within your membership?
Yeah, sure. So it's a big part of the discussion. So as I mentioned, the core group is multidisciplinary. So we've got a few legal companies in there as well as consultancies. So that is a key issue that we've been considering. I think a few things firstly to say. I suppose the evidence base that you need for those type of legal discussions doesn't necessarily exist yet. So in the financial system, for example, you have asset management processes, asset valuation processes which are embedded into that system, and that enable scrutiny and legal teams to build up an evidence base for the kind of cross-examination of different different levels of value within different kind of contractual agreements. I think that's missing. So I think we need to embed those data asset management processes and valuation processes that will enable those discussions longer term. And the government can play a key role in that by funding and convening different organisations that have transferable skills from perhaps the financial system and can put them across into the digital twin ecosystem. And that's potentially an area that's lacking at the moment. I think as well, Mark alluded to, so I think the secure, resilient data sharing mechanisms from a technical standpoint also, they don't necessarily exist yet. So I think, again, need to engage industry to understand what those should look like and how encourage different companies to participate in those data sharing agreements. An interesting area that we've been seeing so far is, again, already been alluded to, but coming out of the ODI, so the Data Trust Initiative. And Kevin Reeves, who's not on the call now, but from Crosslane, has been looking quite closely at how you might embed a data trust approach within a national environmental digital twin to bring different companies together to share data and share information on their models and hardware within the bounds of a kind of contractual agreement related to that data trust. So that's a potential avenue, but I guess we just need to see whether that sort of thing actually works in practicality, what it looks like, and whether it's a scalable approach. And then another point, I suppose, there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from open source communities and kind of more open ways of sharing data. And I think one of the things I heard in Mark's presentation actually was around the RAMP initiative. So I think it stands, correct me if I'm wrong, Rapid Assistance in Modelling the Pandemic. So I think that's a really interesting approach of where there's these high levels of risk and uncertainty and an immediate kind of cross-cutting challenge that needs to be addressed through the application of simulation and data. And it's just, I guess, where we can transfer those successful approaches across into other domains that can kind of spur collaboration on data-centric activities. And then the final point from a legal perspective that I've already spoken about right at the start was just around the availability of metadata relating to different digital twin arrays. So if that information is more available, ultimately that facilitates kind of more coherent conversations between the different stakeholders and enables legal companies to understand where particular companies stand on particular issues.
Great. Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Catherine, for the excellent question. I hope the answers from the panel have gone some way to illuminating quite a complex topic. Just moving on, we've had a question from Stephen Zhang. I don't know, Stephen, if you'd like to come off mute and ask the question yourself and introduce yourself, or again, I'm more than happy to pose the question on your behalf.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Yeah, this is Stephen, and I'm a fan of the digital twin, and I'm a frequent participant for the previous weekly webinars. And actually, I hope to propose a question for anyone in the panel. So is there any data or digital twin that you want to share with others? So that means that's something you have and you want to make it available to others, or do you have any? Do you want to say that digital twin or data set that held by others that you want to get? And for example, as I just try to type, actually maybe I will put it in the question to save time for the panelists to answer my question.
Thank you, Stephen. I wonder, perhaps over to Neil. I guess there's some really good examples of kind of use cases around data sharing from the NUR project. Whether you've got anything there you'd like to add to Stephen's question.
Yeah, well, I think this is quite an easy one for me. The one that I would like to see out there and shared is obviously a national underground asset register. That's been my life for the well, probably for the last 20 years on and off. So I'm hoping we're moving forward now. And yeah, I mean, for us, this is driven primarily by safety and and obviously the social impact of damage to bird assets. But we certainly hope that can be a building block in the future if we can get if we can establish this national picture of what's underground. We really see that could be a building block for other for other use cases in the future as well. And of course, the subsurface is about more than the man-made assets within it. There's all sorts of use cases around better use of the subsurface, custodianship of the subsurface, and how it relates to the above ground world as well, and that join between the subsurface and all the work going on in construction around BIM. So, but yeah, as I said in my presentation, we're very much focused on the first step, which is getting established for the high value use cases around safety and the efficiencies arising from that. But yeah, easy answer for me. NUAR is the one that I want to share.
So can I come in then next, Tom?
Yeah, of course you can, Miranda.
The thing I'm desperate to see is I'm less worried about sharing. I think the ODI, I absolutely adore the ODI work on sustainable data institutions, and I think that work has to continue and develop. And the ODI do a great job in calling for data to be open. The thing I really, really want to see is a more sophisticated model, which is I give you my data, or I make my data available to you on sophisticated terms. So if I make it available to you for the purposes of, for example, workforce safety, then there is a benefit returned to me, which is appropriate, so that the data I have and I can give to a shared endeavour is sustainable and increases in quality to improve the benefits to us all of us sharing that data. So I'm less about one-way sharing. I want to see value transactions starting to grow and develop. So here's my nasty question to you, Neil. Why then is it appropriate to make NUAR a commercial endeavour? Is it not for public good? Why are we allowing somebody to extract value just through the sharing of data when examples such as the Copenhagen Data Exchange failed so spectacularly?
Very good pointed question, Miranda. Thank you. Neil, I don't know if you have a response to that.
Yeah, I mean we are still working on the. It's not set in stone what that commercial model will be. We are. This is all about NUAR. The NUAR project is all about establishing value and taking pragmatic steps towards that. So that is a sequence of events. So we are looking to make that data available initially to those that those that do dig up the street. The statutory undertakers, the local authorities, and their supply chain. But that is the high value use case to support safe working. But we see, I don't see that as a one-way flow of value, given the, as I mentioned, the impact on everyone in the country of the, damage to assets, and the societal impact of that. So by supporting safe working for those that do dig up the road, we are benefiting the whole of society. As for future directions of that and future use cases, that's always on the agenda. But we are taking a pragmatic approach to delivering those specific high value use cases first. Does that answer the question, Miranda?
I just think it's, well, we could debate this long and hard, but if we think that the National Digital Twin is a public good, is it appropriate for it to be delivered by a commercial contractor and under tender? Now, that's a specific question. I think maybe we should open it out wider and perhaps ask David this one. What is the incentive for people who are creating simulations in digital twins? What is their incentive to make their systems interoperable with others, so that in the event that they don't achieve global domination, we can all still extract good from interoperable simulations and interoperable twins?
I feel there's a bit of an onus on me to come in as the commercial one, trying to build a business doing that. And it's a really interesting question that we argue about every day internally. And we're actually working very closely with the ODI to try and understand a business model that proves, and let's go back to that ROI piece where it says, actually, can we demonstrate to someone like, this could be a water provider, who say, actually, there's a benefit for you to supply your data into this and potentially pay for doing so. That's obviously beneficial to the organizations who are actually managing these things, because there's complexity and there's cost involved in that. But what is the benefit to them back in terms of integrating into the ecosystem? So is there reduced cost in terms of maintenance? Are they going to be better informed about maybe transport planning changes and maintenance that actually has a knock-on effect across it? So the conversation that we're having in leagues is about that communication piece and making that an improved and more efficient process, and that in itself is the cost saving there is just a win-win all round. So that's the entry point that we're going at it. I think there's going to be learnings from that hopefully will expand and go from there. And we're very keen to find sustainable business models. Stephen's asked question a lot was about sustainability from climate perspective, but actually, particularly given the COVID crisis and the financial impact of it, we need to be looking at it from a sustainability, from an economic and business perspective as well. And to that point, that global dominance isn't going to be a thing here. Even if Microsoft ends up becoming the biggest supplier, you're still going to have an AWS solution. You're going to have an IBM solution as well. And they're going to need to play ball. We're going to need to find the ways that these all work together. So that's where we're coming at it. I'm happy to be told I'm wrong, and also happy to try it as well. We're very in the process of let's try it and see what works best. So that's an open invitation to anyone on the call as well. So if you want to try something, let's give it a go and see what we can do.
So fascinating discussion, and certainly welcome those pointed and challenging questions. I think it does scratch the surface a little bit deeper. I wonder, just cutting back to Stephen's question and whether Tom has any thoughts on that. I think it was you, Tom, that mentioned the value of digital twin demonstrators and focusing on some specific cases such as COP26.
I think there's the environmental resilience building example, which I think a number of different companies across the built environment sector are looking at it and considering how it would integrate within their particular business context. I also think there's an interesting area around cybersecurity. So obviously a big need to kind of enhance the UK's resilience to external cyber threats in the future. Can be kind of conceived of as a similar kind of exogenous shock that's potentially on the horizon in the years to come. So various initiatives around digital twinning within a kind of cyber context, and perhaps an area that's kind of overlooked, given that it's not traditionally thought of as a kind of domain to apply a digital twin. When you think of a digital twin as something with a physical asset, I think there is a need there to recognise that there are non-physical things that you can build a digital twin of. An example beyond those two kind of areas of resilience that I would point to as well is just perhaps a digital twin of social care. So obviously in the current context, in the current climate, there is a need to think about how we're going to employ millions of people who are currently unemployed in the post-COVID era, and whether there is a way that we need to kind of revalue certain forms of employment and build up efficiency in systems that aren't particularly functioning as it stands. And I think social care is a big area there where digital twins could be applied and have a massive impact on the operational efficiency of a system that's fundamentally quite easy to model in a theoretical sense, and that there would be kind of transformational benefits from doing so. Just to circle back maybe to a couple of other points that Miranda made as well, around perhaps why the government wouldn't take such a leadership in developing this kind of national digital twin without the steer from industry. I suppose the first one is the traditional one of kind of resource asymmetry. So from a skills and technology capacity perspective, I don't think the government's there yet in terms of fully understanding the concept of a digital twin, let alone having the capabilities to implement it long term. I think it came out in a recent government brief. They were calling it a digital clone rather than a digital twin. So I think there is a lot of work there that needs to be done around actually building up that technology capacity of the government. But it's not to say that that can't be done in the long term. I just think it needs to steer from industry to get there. And then also, I would just question the extent to which the government itself evaluates the feasibility and viability of projects based on a kind of non-commercial basis. I think traditionally the evaluation and impact evaluation of different projects has been around relatively narrow economic terms. And I think there is a need for industry to build out those value frameworks, but there also is a need within government and the internal processes across Whitehall to think about how we can expand those value frameworks and apply them to a digital twin context. And longer term, I think there is just an opportunity cost of not engaging industry. So both from harnessing the expertise to understand what the capacity is that the government will need to adopt in order to accelerate digital twin projects. But then also, I think in terms of that world dominance piece, I think what we're hoping is that different companies, asset owner operators, will develop their own digital twins to enable their own business processes. So it's more of a kind of internal organic process rather than a top-down one company saying, this is the overarching model that all companies and systems have to adhere to. So I think a few different points there, but I just think it needs to be a cross-sector approach rather than a government only. And I don't think the ecosystem will fully thrive without the input from industry, which is slightly further along the spectrum of maturity.
Thanks, Tom. I think, Mark, just to round out the responses from the panel, I wonder, from your perspective, what are your hopes and aspirations when it comes to being able to share data more widely, and what are the key data sources that you'd like to see made available to enhance the work that you're doing?
I guess, the one thing that sort of struck me is, we're thinking a lot about, sharing data and bringing big data assets together within this, national digital twin. But there is a slightly different, sort of narrative around. Sometimes there are, physical issues these days with, sending big data sets around and all that kind of thing. But the idea of whether the technology itself might be mobile, and to an extent this is sort of a technical observation, but sending applications to data rather than data to applications sort of thing. But I just think we might be thinking about the digital twin as a set of capabilities, I guess, as well as that actual sort of data side of things. So there might well be situations in which we're not actually, bringing all that data together at the heart of our digital twin. And an example, again, thinking back to the work that we have ongoing in COVID. We're talking to a major financial organisation that wants to share data that will be very informative about people's behaviour and activity patterns, coming together in bars and restaurants and shops and so forth. But they don't want to put that data into the public domain. They're never going to be coming to an agreement with the Open Data Institute to share data through that kind of model. But are there ways that we can develop models or simulations or statistical analyses that say, can we draw out some of those key patterns that we want to understand in order to be able to create our twin of how the population is moving around and being exposed to infection without, drilling into all the commercial sensitivity of who spent how much on their groceries at what retail organisation within the last week or month or what have you. So, certainly again in terms of some of those higher value applications and some of the things that point particularly towards that more sort of personal restricted data, it might not just be about reaching agreements of how we can make sure everybody gets access to the data. There may be other ways to extract some of the value that we need to do that. And it's similar arguments with things like patient data, for example, where you want to understand the patterns and the interrelationships and the outcomes from certain kinds of treatments and things, but you don't necessarily want to expose all that highly personal individual data to anybody to come in and have a look at. So that probably only answers part of your question, but that was one of my main thoughts.
Great, thank you, Mark. We don't currently have any further questions from the audience, so I'm going to ask my second question, but if there are questions that are out there and people would like to ask them, there is still time, so please add those to the chat. My second question, I guess, ultimately comes from a perspective that running a series of twin talks is ultimately all about knowledge sharing. And I wonder, as members of the Twin Talk series, what are the key insights that you will take away from talks given by others? And equally, are there any questions or challenges that you would like to ask one another as part of the panel debate?
I've got a question for Mark, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, Tom.
It's around the RAMP initiative, run by the Untitled Institute. I just wondered, how has that fared? What's been successful? What hasn't worked, I suppose? And do you think there are kind of transferable approaches that we could bring across into the digital twin context?
Yeah, okay. So I should clarify that the RAMP itself is an initiative that came out of the Royal Society originally in March. It responded very quickly to the issues with the pandemic. So there's a particular piece of work which is around, kind of digital twin or demographic twin that the Turing has been jointly leading with the Royal Society in terms of response there. So I should make that clear in terms of kind of attribution of credit and so forth. And actually, I think reflecting that the whole RAMP thing and the way the Royal Society has approached it has been quite interesting. I mean, one of the things that they've done that's been sorry, I try not to be too long-winded, but it's one of the motivations was really trying to support like SPI-M and SAGE and the government scientists who are advising on the response kind of thing and just trying to do that at greater scale. One of the things they've done, which has been really quite successful, has been just sort of a rapid review process. So bringing people, lots of people coming up with ideas about, here's things that we could do, or even, bits of data analysis or models and this, that, and the other, and some of which is really scientifically quite robust. Others might be coming out of left field and might be great, but it might not be quite as reliable. And, getting people to, they call it a rapid review group, responding and working on that has been quite successful. Another thing that they've done is to create a series of activities with the Isaac Newton Institute in Cambridge, which, maybe this is coming back to some of the things in relation to Mark Enzer's question, because again, you bring in a community of mathematicians and modelers and scientists together to present stuff, to brainstorm stuff, to kind of co-develop stuff. So that's been interesting and quite successful. Good to see that continuing, and yeah, maybe some parallels to this series actually in terms of that initiative. The third thing, I think, specifically around the work that we've been doing at the Turing, I think it's been quite interesting. A lot of people have found it because you've got COVID, you've got a pandemic out there. You know, there's a real problem there that people want to focus on. You know, they've brought a lot of energy to. You know, and I use it as an example in my talk because in 3 or 4 months, you know, probably less, a small team has, I think, been able to make real progress on quite a general, you know, sort of problem. And again, that might point to, you know, if we could get a well-defined demonstrator as a community, you know, that we really wanted to commit to and to invest resource in, you know, I think it is possible, you know, maybe to use that to drive engagement and broader understanding and awareness and buy-in to what we're trying to do. But how you reproduce that real energy and urgency of having a situation around you, you know, where people are, you know, getting ill and dying in very, very large numbers. Yeah, you know, it's difficult, I think, to recreate that in a, you know, within some kind of slightly more abstract demonstration environment.
Thanks, Mark, for the response, and Tom for the question. I wonder, to the panelists, any further insights and questions you'd like to ask one another?
So, can I ask David, what is the difficulty in growing a business in this space?
That's a tough question. So other than the usual challenges of just growing any business, I think there's 2 parts to the answer to that. One is actually an educational piece, which we've already touched on, in the sense of explaining what is meant by a digital twin, and specifically doing it in a way that is meaningful to all the stakeholders involved in the conversation, most of whom are not from a technical background. That's a really important piece. And it's saying, what does it mean to them? And for us, that comes down to storytelling and ROI. That's in essence because that's the terminology that they will work with. So actually, what does this mean to me, and what does it mean for my bottom line? And I think that point that Neil made about social ROI is a really good point there. It's not necessarily pure economics, but there is an impact. It could be safety. You know, if this helps save lives, there's a clear, it's measurable, quantifiable, there's a clear benefit. That's probably the most challenging piece. It's getting easier, but it's still incredibly challenging. The second piece is then something that we have touched on already again, which is to do with the willingness to share data. Because inherently it is a step towards open data. It doesn't have to be. But that willingness to share, even if it's their own, within their own departments, so many, you know, corporates actually getting data from building A to building B, that's hard enough. Let alone having a third party come in and say, actually, we need to put that onto an Azure or AWS data warehouse or something to that effect. Well, those are some of the more political challenges, social challenges that need to be dealt with, that are just magnified, because without the data, a digital twin is nothing. We have actually at Slingshot come up with a slightly more unique approach sometimes to get around that, which I'm sure the academics on the call might want to stone me in a second, which is where if we can't get hold of the data up front, we say, let's get the domain experts and do a workshop on whiteboards, and let's actually draw out the flowcharts, the shapes of the graphs that summarize that. Because if they're a domain expert and they've been doing it for 30 years, they can probably get 95% of the way there based on their tacit knowledge. And what we're able to do then is we take that and we present the horrifically inaccurate simulations and digital twins back to the stakeholders, who are more than happy to tell us we've got it wrong. And suddenly they will release their data to prove that we've got it wrong. It's a backwards way of thinking that actually works quite well, but unfortunately that also takes time. So that's probably where we've seen the biggest challenges. So yeah.
Thanks, David. Yeah, good insights there. Any other questions across the panel? Or follow-ups there?
Can I ask a follow-on question to Miranda?
Yes, of course.
It's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but so I'm going to say, is your previous question motivated by OS wanting to become a venture capitalist in the new digital world? But perhaps more seriously, I know that OS has been looking at, or if I'm right, I think you've been looking at your kind of business strategy. And I wonder if there's anything that you might be able to say about the way that you see your organisation developing itself to the new, the new digital world kind of thing.
So I can answer that easily and say I left OS in April. So I can answer it in a dispassionate way.
Okay.
In that I think the problem with something so pivotal to digital infrastructure as location data, and particularly high quality location data, is difficult to quantify its value, it is a microcosm of the business model problem, because it is a public good which enables so much other value to be generated. Who then pays for the public good? And why are we pressurizing the OS to create cash and value in the short term when its value is sort of distributed across the economy so thinly? And I think that is a conundrum for the leadership of OS. So I have always railed against open data because it undermines the value of data. It's the difference between free speech and free beer. Free speech is a universal good. Transparency around MPs' expenses and where public money goes is an important thing for a functioning democracy. But giving away raw material undermines the value of it long term, and it forces the supply chain to take on costs. So if we were to make, if we were all to invest in a data infrastructure that enables whatever data assets we create to clip together easily, that would be a good thing. But I think particularly when you have regulators motivated by lowest consumer cost, and you don't have a controlling mind in this. DCMS is when it talks about the digital strategy, it talks a lot about personal data rather than digital infrastructure. So while we don't have somebody in government with responsibility and accountability for data infrastructure, it is a sort of a bit of a Gordian knot, I think. But, welcome your view on that, Mark.
Well, I think you're closer to it than I am. I was what can I say? Never a great Thatcherite, so I'd probably support your view that it's a shame that OS has been and other similar institutions are being pushed so closely towards the market in some ways. But clearly, it's I guess it's an expensive organisation and a business to run. So somebody's got to find some sort of creative solution to the business model problem. And maybe I'm right, and OS does need to become a venture capitalist in relation to the businesses like David's.
Thank you for those questions. I think fascinating to hear kind of a panel of experts question, challenge one another, and see which direction it takes. We still haven't got any further questions for the audience, so I'm going to ask my third question to kind of round off the last 15 minutes of the roundtable. The second point in our objectives for the Twin Talk series was understanding what active steps organisations are taking in order to support the interconnection of digital twins. I wonder from the panel's perspective, for those on the roundtable today and equally those watching this in future, what are, we've listened to this discussion and people agree that this is an important thing they want to take forward within their own organisations. What are those active steps? I think in a practical sense, first things that people can do to advance interconnected digital twins.
My first step is work out what you want it for. Work out which bits of your organisation don't talk to each other, and if they did, and which would be the highest value if they did. And I think that would do us all enormous favours, because then we would build appropriate technology to create high value. And one thing we haven't talked about or mentioned is I'm going to get the name wrong, but the 5 capitals model, which the Construction Leadership Council have used to evaluate impact. And that's because I think that would help us lift out of a narrow ROI discussion. And if people who are thinking about investing in twins or models or simulations can pick out why it really matters for them and invest in it, and then share that information so others can build successful business cases. Not the traditional anodyne. My case, we were all brilliant and we all learned a great deal, and we made some tiny mistakes and they meant nothing. If people can be honest about what the real problems are that we can bring great minds to, I think we will further the cause. And as David said, answer the question with better storytelling and better data as to why it's something worth doing.
Thanks, Amanda. Any other thoughts on practical first steps for people looking to take forward interconnected digital twins?
I'd say something. I can say something briefly, Tom, about what the Turing is actually doing. So, to report that we are in. So for the last 2 years, we've been running a couple of related digital twin projects. One in the urban analytics space, which is around the sorts of things that I'm interested in, and Mark Girolami, who a number of you may know, who also has some connections to CDBB, has been involved in some things more at the engineering, physical infrastructure, buildings sort of side of things. We're moving towards the second half of a major 5-year UKRI project. We're trying to reorientate that towards something called ecosystems of digital twins. So, to really, I guess in a research sense, to tackle face on these questions relating to interconnectedness, and in some ways of trying to address the practical issues that we touched on in this conversation about why you want to connect together digital twins. But I guess also from the intellectual, again, thinking about the data science, the modeling, the simulation, the fact that we have a lot of common challenges in these different areas that we can benefit from some kind of common analysis. So I could just respond. We're trying to take it on in terms of actually rolling the sleeves up and getting stuck into the research. And I think that's that benefits from a fairly substantial UKRI program. But I think UKRI and EPSRC are also getting the message that digital twins is an area where they want to see national research investment coming in. It's actually not that different to some of the more sort of commercial type questions, but you still got to demonstrate what the benefits are and why we need to be spending money on this rather than in health research or ... But I think there are strong indications coming that they do buy into this, and I mean, we are going to see increasing academic research in this area. I think perhaps making sure that we get the impact story around it and maintaining these strong connections with the real applications, that would be an important thing for me, I think.
Thanks, Mark. I think I'll throw to Neil next. I know from Neil's talk that the first steps taken in the UR project resonate very strongly with the comments from both Mark and Miranda. So I wonder, Neil, if you'd be willing to share maybe a summary of those first steps, but equally any of the lessons for learning that you took out of the pilot and are looking to apply as UR matures.
Sure. Yeah, I think. As we've said, the technology is almost the easy bit, and building communities, building trust, and expressing value to those stakeholders is the key thing. I think one thing we've kind of touched on in this session, but maybe not gone into detail is data quality, and I think my view is, and I think the general view around NUAR is, if you wait for data to be perfect before you do anything, you'll be waiting forever and never start. So I think starting on the journey is important, and starting to think about how a digital twin or a digital representation can be an engine for data quality improvement, rather than just a passive recipient of whatever data is there. I think that's really important, because the data will never be objectively good enough. So how can we move along that path and actually drive data quality improvement as we go? Is really that's really important. And then just coming back to this, I think this is almost this has come up a lot during this talk. It's in terms of interconnected digital twins. How do you step outside your silo and express the value of joining up? I just feel that we, in general, we don't do that very well. We have, as we said, quite a narrow focus on ROI and a specific business case, and getting that over the line and getting started. And it's really difficult to zoom out and really consider those broader benefits of joining up. And I don't have an easy answer to that, but I think that's a key thing, and that will be a blocker to as long as building in interoperability and extensibility is seen as a cost and not a benefit, then we're going to struggle to break out of those silos. So we need some thinking about how we express that value above and beyond the specific business case.
Great, thanks, Neil. I wonder if next, just going to Tom Henderson on, in effect, the practical steps that you may see members of the technology community taking to move towards interconnected digital twins.
Yeah, sure. So I think, again, echo a lot of what has already been said, but I think first step, as Miranda said, is really just having clarity on the definition of purpose. So, what is the analytical problem that you're seeking to address? What is the business problem that you need to tackle? And sometimes it seems like an obvious step, but it is one that's often overlooked. People get enticed by the array of different potential things that a digital twin could do for their business without really thinking about the problem at hand that would be most amenable to the application of a digital twin. And then I think the second step would be actually to identify those requisite analytical methods that you need to tackle that analytical problem. So I think engaging with industry or some sort of collaborative community to identify what those methods are, and as Neil said there, the feasibility of integrating data. Is it of a high enough quality to integrate it within a digital twin for this particular application? And then the third, I would say, is just making sure that your overarching journey is dynamic, adaptive, and resilient. So, thinking about those different potential development pathways that you could base your own, adoption strategy along, and then also thinking about, what are those triggers of success and failure further down the line? What do they look like in a quantifiable, tangible sense? So, if the digital twin isn't delivering on a particular analytic, does that mean we have to switch to a different alternative adoption strategy? And I think having those three core kind of components at the initial phase will enable you to kind of build out your journey and learn along the way as well.
Thanks, Tom. And I wonder if I could ask you, David, we weren't able to have Dan Clark from Cambridge City Council join us today. Given your work within the kind of simulation and the city space, maybe whether you could reflect on some of the practical first steps that you've seen cities or other asset owners taking as sort of enablers into getting into the opportunity to create digital twin simulations from the perspective of Slingshot.
Yeah, I think the first example, which might sound slightly trivial, is actually being willing to try. And that isn't necessarily, so we've done a lot of engagement with local authorities and with actually major consultancies as well, where our first engagement has been on a zero cost basis, but it's on a time investment from both sides. And actually we're going to put that, and we're going to do something over a month or 6 weeks, and we're going to try this out and use that as a learning piece. And we're going to accept that we're going to fail. The failure is almost guaranteed for that first piece, because what we're going to do is we're going to identify that half the data, we don't have it yet. So it's not possible to succeed. So that's that first piece. And actually telling that to stakeholders can be quite scary, saying, what we're going to invest this time, it's going to fail. Like, well, yes, but you have to fail to learn. And that's really important. So the first piece in all of our engagements with authorities and others has been, let's be willing to try this over anything between 6 weeks and 3 months. We're going to give this a go. We're going to accept there's a cost associated with it. It's small, but we're going to learn from it, and we're going to use that to scope a bigger piece. So it's that iterative piece, more of almost like an agile engineering, but an agile process to building digital twins with all the stakeholders and bringing people in at the appropriate time. And that's how we're taking it. And I'll give an example. Actually, there's a piece of work we're doing where we're looking at social distancing within office space. And that's all about, very quickly, within a couple of weeks, can we build full digital models of the space, furniture layouts and all of that, and look at the risk ratio of returning to workplace. Of course, very prevalent right now. And the first piece of that was saying, look, we're just going to try this. We'd not done a piece of work in that space before. Social distancing wasn't a thing 5 months ago. So, we said, let's just give this a go, put that investment of time, share some data, which was challenging, and see what that. And now, having done that first iteration, we're now into interesting commercial terms, actually, discussing what the next step is, because that's been demonstrated. And there's no tie-in as well. Our client could go to someone else. Obviously, we want to stay, but it's really just saying that, look, let's build the trust, build the relationship, and give it a go.
Right, thank you. And I think a really good perspective on the importance of learning from failure as well as success, which is equally something we'd welcome within the Digital Twin Hub. I think we're perfectly at time now, so at 12 o'clock. So it goes to me to say thanks to all of the presenters today, both for joining us on the roundtable and equally contributing to the Twin Talk series. It's really been excellent to see, and I think a real asset for our community in terms of the knowledge that's been generated. Equally, would like to thank everyone that's taken part in the discussion and attended today's talk and all of the discussions that we've had over the last 7 weeks. All of the recordings for this and the previous talks will be made available on the Digital Twin Hub. Previous talks are already there. This one will be posted this week. So yeah, I would like to thank everyone that's been involved in this series for their contribution. And yeah, look forward to kind of continuing the discussion on the Digital Twin Hub. Thank you all.